Your daughter is a disgrace." His words echoed for 12 years, a ghost haunting every success. Today I stood in his dying bakery, ready to deliver my own verdict. The words echoed in my head for 12 years, a ghost haunting every success, every Michelin star, every glowing review. Your daughter is a disgrace. My father hadn't even looked at me when he said it. He delivered the verdict to my mother, his voice a low, rumbling thunder across the polished mahogany of our dining room table. I was just an object in the room, a tarnished piece of family silver that needed to be put away. That night, the air was thick with the smell of my mother's pot roast and unspoken disappointment. I was 19 and I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of our perfectly curated, flower-dusted life. It had been building for months. My father, Arthur Hansen, was the third-generation owner of Hansen's Fine Pastries, a local institution famed for its delicate croissants and architecturally sound wedding cakes. To him, the bakery wasn't a business. It was a legacy, a living monument to our family's name. The smell of yeast and melting butter was in our blood. It was expected, not asked, that I would follow in his footsteps, just as he had followed his father's. I would marry a respectable local boy, have respectable children, and one day, my hands, like his, would be permanently dusted with a fine layer of confectioner's sugar. But my dreams tasted different. They were savory and spicy, infused with saffron and chili, not vanilla and almond. I didn't want to perfect a 100-year-old recipe. I wanted to create new ones. The bomb I dropped on that dinner table was a letter, an acceptance letter to one of the most prestigious culinary institutes in the country, a place that celebrated molecular gastronomy and fusion cuisine, words that were blasphemy in my father's traditional kitchen. To make matters worse, the letter came with a personal recommendation and an apprenticeship offer from a chef named Marco Valentin, a culinary rock star known for his rebellious techniques and, most damningly, for opening a modern bistro that had stolen the Best Dessert title from Hansen's at the Regional Food Awards the year before. In my father's eyes, Marco wasn't a chef. He was a charlatan, a vandal who threw foams and gels on a plate and called it food. And I had not only chosen to follow that path, but I had aligned myself with the enemy. I remember clearing my throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. "Dad, Mom, I have some news." My mother, Eleanor, gave me a small, nervous smile, her eyes pleading with me not to start anything. My father continued cutting his roast with surgical precision. "I've been accepted to the Culinary Institute of America, the main campus, and Chef Valentin has offered me a full apprenticeship." I slid the letter across the table. My father didn't look at it. He simply laid his knife and fork down, perfectly parallel to each other. The clink of silver on porcelain was like a gunshot. "We have the finest culinary school in the state right here," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "And the only apprenticeship you need is in your own family's kitchen." "Dad, this is different," I pleaded, my voice shaking. "This is about innovation, about learning new—" "Innovation?" He finally looked at me, his blue eyes like chips of ice. "You call what that man does innovation? He serves dirt on a plate and calls it a deconstructed chocolate torte. It's a fad, Clara. What we do, what our family has done for 75 years, is timeless. It's art. It's legacy." He pushed the letter back towards me without touching it. "You will not be attending. You will enroll in the community college pastry program in the fall, and you will start your management training at the bakery on Monday." That was it. Not a discussion, but a decree. My future, laid out like a recipe I was forced to follow. Something inside me snapped. All the years of biting my tongue, of pretending to be fascinated by the subtle differences in Swiss meringue versus Italian, of smiling politely while my dreams were dismissed as a phase. It all came boiling to the surface. "No," I said. It was a whisper, but it silenced the room. "No?" my father repeated, an incredulous smile playing on his lips. "I'm sorry. I don't think I heard you correctly." I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. "No, I'm not going to community college. I'm not taking over the bakery. I'm going to New York to work for Marco, and I'm going to become a chef. My own kind of chef." The fury that washed over his face was terrifying. He rose to his feet, a giant of a man made larger by his indignation. "You would throw away your birthright? For what? To play with foams and blowtorches with that peacock?" His voice boomed. My mother flinched, whispering, "Arthur, please." But he wasn't listening. He turned his gaze on her, his face contorted with a disgust that seared itself into my memory. "You hear this, Eleanor? This is what your coddling has done. Your daughter is a disgrace." He gestured wildly at me. "She would rather be a line cook in a stranger's kitchen than a Hanson in her own. If you walk out that door, Clara, you are no longer my daughter. This family, this house, this business, it will be dead to you." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs, tears blurring his furious face. I looked at my mother, who was silently crying into her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. In that moment, I knew I had already lost them. So I turned, walked out of the dining room, up the stairs to my bedroom, and packed a single suitcase. An hour later, I was gone. 12 years passed, 12 years of silence, of struggle, of success he never acknowledged. 12 years, and now I was back. I drove my sleek black sedan down the familiar main street of my hometown, the autumn leaves skittering across the pavement just as I remembered. But something was different. The town looked tired, and then I saw it. Hanson's Fine Pastries. The cheerful blue awning was faded and torn. The gold leaf lettering on the window was peeling. A handwritten sign taped to the door read, "Reduced hours." It looked pathetic. A deep, cold satisfaction settled in my stomach. I parked across the street, not looking at my childhood home 2 blocks down, but at the decaying facade of my father's pride. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up a thick manila folder. My assistant had overnighted it to my hotel. I opened it, my eyes scanning the top page. It was an official offer to purchase the commercial property at 124 Main Street, along with all its assets and liabilities. My offer. I smoothed down the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer, the expensive wool a silent testament to the life I had built for myself, brick by painful brick. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car. The air smelled the same, a faint mix of damp earth from the nearby park and the distant sweet promise of sugar from the bakery, though that scent was weaker now, like a fading memory. I pushed the thought away. Nostalgia was a vulnerability I couldn't afford. I crossed the street, my heels clicking a sharp, decisive rhythm on the cracked pavement, a sound that didn't belong here. Each step was a small victory, a reclaiming of ground I had once fled in shame. The little brass bell above the door chimed as I entered, the same cheerful, tinny sound that had punctuated my entire childhood. But the cheer stopped there. The inside of the bakery was a shadow of its former self. I remembered a place bustling with energy, the air warm and fragrant, the glass display cases a treasure chest of glistening fruit tarts, towering eclairs, and perfectly swirled cupcakes. Now the cases were half empty. The few pastries on display looked weary. A tray of croissants sagged in the middle. The piped frosting on a handful of cupcakes was slightly crusty. The room was cool and unnervingly quiet, save for the hum of the old refrigeration unit. A young girl with purple hair and a bored expression was scrolling on her phone behind the counter, not even looking up as I entered. This wasn't a legacy, it was a mausoleum. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat without peeling her eyes from the screen. "I'd like to speak to the owner," I said, my voice cool and steady. She sighed, a gust of teenage annoyance. "He's in the back." She didn't offer to get him. I waited, my gaze sweeping the room, noting the water stain on the ceiling, the chipped paint on the wainscoting. Finally, after an uncomfortably long silence, a door behind the counter creaked open. And there he was. 12 years had bent his broad shoulders, but they hadn't broken him. His hair, once the color of dark rye bread, was now shot through with flour-white streaks. The lines around his eyes and mouth were deeper, etched by worry instead of laughter. He wore the same white apron, though this one was stained and frayed at the hem. He was wiping his hands on a rag, his knuckles still large and powerful, but his movements were slower, heavier. He looked up, his icy blue eyes narrowing at the sight of me, a stranger in a power suit who clearly wasn't here for a day-old Danish. "We're closing in 20, he grunted. It wasn't a question, it was a dismissal. "I'm not here to buy a pastry, Mr. Hansen," I said, walking forward until I stood directly across the counter from him, the counter where I'd once stood on a stool, piping my name clumsily onto a cookie. He stared at me, a flicker of something, confusion, recognition, in his eyes before his default mask of weary irritation slammed back down. "Then you're wasting my time." He turned to go back into the kitchen. "My name is Clara Vance," I said, placing the manila folder on the glass countertop with a soft thud. "I'm a partner at the Sterling Restaurant Group. We're interested in acquiring this property." He froze, his back still to me. Slowly, he turned around. He looked from my face to the expensive watch on my wrist, down to the folder. A dark, humorless chuckle rumbled in his chest. "You're a long way from the city, Ms. Vance, and you've wasted a trip. Hansen's isn't for sale." "Oh, I think it is," I said, my voice softening into something almost gentle, which only made the words more venomous. "I've seen your books. You've been operating at a loss for 3 years. You're 2 months behind on payments to your suppliers, and you've taken out a second mortgage on your home just to make payroll." His face, already pale with fatigue, turned a mottled, angry red. "How dare you? My financials are none of your business." "They are when you're about to default on a loan from the bank my group just acquired," I countered, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the folder. "We're your new lenders, Mr. Hansen, and we're calling in the debt, unless you accept our offer." I slid the folder towards him. He stared at it as if it were a snake. He looked back up at me, his eyes searching my face, the cogs of his memory finally, desperately trying to click into place. He saw something familiar in the curve of my mouth, the determined set of my jaw. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm the person who is going to own this building," I stated, my professional mask firmly in place, hiding the tremor in my own heart. "Whether your bakery is still in it or not is up to you." The bluster and anger drained from his face, replaced by a raw, naked look of defeat. He looked old. He looked broken. And in that moment, I felt a sliver of something I hadn't expected, a painful, twisting pity. He reached out a trembling, flour-dusted hand and was about to touch the folder when the back door creaked open again. "Arthur, did you get the invoices from the front? The flour delivery is here and they won't unload until—" The voice trailed off. I looked past my father. Standing in the doorway holding a clipboard was my mother. She looked a decade older than her 60-odd years. Her hair was completely gray, pulled back in a loose, messy bun. Her face was a roadmap of worry. Her eyes met mine. The clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. The sound was like a thunderclap in the silent, sad bakery. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief, flooding with a million questions and 12 years of pain. "Clara," she breathed, the name a fragile, broken thing in the air between us. "My baby girl?" My father's head snapped towards her, then back to me, the recognition finally dawning in his eyes, not as a gentle sunrise, but as a harsh, blinding floodlight. The name, Clara, spoken in my mother's trembling voice, was the key that unlocked the last 12 years. He saw me then. Not Clara Vance, the corporate predator from the city, but Clara Hansen, the disgraced daughter he had cast out. His face contorted, a storm of emotions passing over it. Shock, confusion, and then a deep, bone-weary resentment that settled into the lines around his mouth, hardening them like cement. He looked down at the folder on the counter between us, then back up at my face, and the last vestiges of weary defeat were burned away by a fresh inferno of pride. "Get out," he said, his voice a low, guttural growl. He pushed the folder back towards me with the tips of his fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Get out of my shop." My mother, on the other hand, took a tentative step forward, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "Clara, is it really you? We didn't know where you went. We didn't know if you were—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice softer than I intended. The sight of her, so much older and more fragile than I remembered, chipped away at the armor I had so carefully constructed. I had pictured this reunion 1,000 times, and in every version, I was an avenging angel, untouchable and serene. I had not accounted for the sudden, fierce ache in my chest at the sight of my mother's grief. "Fine? You call this fine?" My father spat, his hand sweeping out to encompass the scene, me in my designer suit, the folder full of legal threats, the palpable tension sucking the air out of the room. "You come back here after 12 years, not with a phone call, not with a letter, but with this, with lawyers and threats, to kick us out of our own business? Our home?" His voice rose with each question, echoing in the empty bakery. The purple-haired girl behind the counter was now staring openly, her phone forgotten. "This is just business, Dad," I said, forcing the ice back into my tone. "You taught me that. Emotion has no place in a balance sheet." "Don't you dare call me that," he roared, slamming his fist down on the counter. The half-empty display case rattled, a lonely macaron skittering off its perch. "You lost the right to call me that the day you walked out that door. You are no daughter of mine." My mother flinched as if struck. "Arthur, stop it! She's here! Our Clara is here!" she pleaded, moving to his side and placing a hand on his arm. He shook her off without looking at her. His gaze was locked on me as a laser beam of pure, unadulterated fury. "She is not our Clara," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Our Clara would have had respect. She would have had loyalty. She wouldn't have abandoned her family for some culinary fad. This is a stranger, a vulture, come to pick at the bones." The words were like stones, each one striking a place I thought I had hardened long ago. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the carefully rehearsed composure threatening to crack. "A fad?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. That fad gave me 2 restaurants, a James Beard Award, and a net worth that could buy and sell this entire town 10 times over. What has your legacy given you, Dad? A mountain of debt and a failing shop. It was a low blow, and I knew it. The truth in it made it all the more cruel. I saw the impact in his eyes, a flicker of pain so profound it almost made me regret it. Almost. My mother started sobbing quietly, her hand still hovering near his arm. "Please," she whispered to the room, to no one. "Please don't do this." I ignored her plea, pressing my advantage. "This offer," I said, tapping the folder again, "is more than generous. It's enough to pay off your debts, retire comfortably, and walk away with your dignity. It's more than you deserve, frankly. The bank would be well within its rights to simply foreclose and seize the assets." "Dignity?" he scoffed, his face a mask of contempt. "You talk to me about dignity. You who slithered back here to humiliate your own family? We will never sell to you. I would burn this place to the ground before I let you have it. I would rather be bankrupt and homeless on the street than take a single penny of your blood money." My mother gasped. "Arthur, don't say that. Think about what you're saying." "I am thinking, Eleanor," he shouted, finally turning to her. "For 12 years we wondered. We prayed. And for what? For her to return as our enemy? As our landlord? She is a disgrace, I told you then, and I'll tell you now." His words, the exact same words from that night, struck me with the force of a physical blow. The room swam for a second. The ghost I thought I had outrun had caught up to me. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself, my knuckles white. My cool professional facade shattered, revealing the hurt 19-year-old girl underneath. "Fine," I said, my voice trembling with a rage that matched his own. "Have it your way. Reject the offer. I'll see you in court. The eviction notice will be served on Monday." I turned on my heel, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I couldn't breathe in that room for another second. I had to get out. As I reached the door, my mother's voice, choked with desperation, called out after me. "Clara, wait, there's something you don't know, something your father never told you." I paused, my hand on the doorknob, my back to them both. "Eleanor, don't you dare," my father warned, his voice low and dangerous. I hesitated, caught between the urge to flee and a sudden, sharp spike of curiosity. What could he possibly have hidden from me? What secret could be worse than the public declaration of my own damnation? The silence that followed my mother's outburst was thick and heavy, like unrisen dough. I could feel my father's glare boring into my back, a physical force willing me to leave. My mother's desperate plea hung in the air, a fragile thread I could either cut by walking out the door or pull to unravel. What? More pain? More secrets? Against every instinct screaming at me to escape, I slowly turned back around. My mother stood there, her hands clasped together at her chest, her face a mess of tears and resolve. My father had moved to stand slightly in front of her, a human shield built of stubborn pride. "There's nothing to tell," he growled, his eyes daring my mother to speak. "This is a private family matter, not a negotiation tactic." "It is a negotiation tactic," I shot back, my voice regaining its sharp edge. "Because everything is a negotiation now. You made sure of that. So what is it, Mom? What deep, dark secret have you been keeping for 12 years? My mother looked at my father, her expression pleading. "Arthur, she deserves to know. After all this time, she has a right. It's the only way." He didn't answer, just stared at her with a look of profound betrayal. It was all the permission she needed. She took a shaky breath and wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's about the bakery," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "After you left, things got hard. The economy took a downturn a few years later. People stopped having money for luxuries, for cakes and pastries. Every business has its ups and downs," I said dismissively, though a cold knot was forming in my stomach. I knew the story of the recession, of course, but I had experienced it from the kitchens of thriving big city restaurants where people still paid top dollar for an escape. I never once considered how it might have hit this small town, this small shop. "It was more than that," she continued, her gaze dropping to the worn linoleum floor. "Your father. He's a wonderful baker, the best there ever was, but he's not a businessman, Clara. Not like his father was. He's an artist. He refused to compromise on ingredients, even when the prices tripled. He couldn't adapt." Her words painted a picture of my father I knew all too well, a man of principle to the point of self-destruction. The pride that made his cakes legendary was the same pride that was now sinking his ship. "He took out loans," my mother whispered, "to keep the quality the same, to keep the staff on. He thought things would turn around. He poured everything we had back into this place." "He poured his life into this place," my father interjected, his voice raw. "The life you threw away." "Let her finish, Arthur," my mother said, a surprising firmness in her tone. She looked back at me, her eyes holding mine. "About 6 years ago, we were on the verge of bankruptcy. The first time. We were going to lose everything. The house, the shop, everything your grandfather built." I stood frozen, the manila folder in my hand suddenly feeling heavier, colder. This wasn't just a story of a recent downturn. This was a slow, agonizing decay that had started years ago. While I was accepting awards and posing for magazine covers, they were here, drowning. A wave of something uncomfortable, guilt, shame, washed over me. "But we didn't go bankrupt," she said, her voice dropping even lower, "because someone stepped in, an investor. He bought up our debt, paid our suppliers. He saved us." I frowned, my business brain kicking into gear. An investor? Who? There are no other partners listed on the corporate filings. It's a sole proprietorship. "He wanted to be a silent partner," my mother explained. "He said he didn't want any credit. He believed in your father. He believed in Hanson's." A silent, benevolent investor in a small-town bakery? It made no sense. It was a fairy tale. "Who was he?" I pressed, my curiosity now a burning fire. "What was his name?" My mother looked at my father again, whose face had become an unreadable mask of stone. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. My mother ignored him. She took a deep breath, as if bracing for an impact. "He made your father promise never to tell you," she said, looking directly at me. "It was his one condition. He said if you ever came back, you weren't to know. He didn't want you to feel obligated." The knot in my stomach tightened into a ball of ice. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see, a truth that would shatter the very foundations of the revenge I had so carefully planned. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Who was it?" My mother's eyes welled up again, but this time, the tears weren't for her or my father. They were for me. "It was Marco," she said, her voice cracking on the name. "Marco Valentin." The name hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. Marco, my mentor, the brilliant, rebellious chef who had plucked me from obscurity and taught me everything I knew. The culinary genius my father had despised, had called a peacock and a charlatan. The man whose success had been the ultimate symbol of my rebellion, the living proof that my father had been wrong about everything. And he had saved my father's business? The business my father had forbidden me from leaving? The irony was so staggering, so cosmically cruel, that I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. "No," I whispered, "that's not possible. Why would he do that?" "Because of you," my mother said simply. "He knew how much this place hurt you, but he also knew it was your family's history. He told your father he was doing it so that one day, if you ever decided to come home, there would be something left for you to come home to." I stared at her, my mind reeling, trying to process the impossible truth. My entire narrative for the last 12 years, the story of my solitary struggle, my single-handed triumph over my family's rejection, it was all a lie. My victory had been silently, secretly subsidized by the very man who represented my escape, all to preserve the legacy of the man who had disowned me. My revenge wasn't a triumph, it was a tragedy. I stumbled back a step, the folder slipping from my numb fingers and scattering its damning contents across the floor. My father wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the spilled papers, his jaw tight, his pride forcing him to live with a secret that must have eaten him alive for 6 years. He owed his entire existence to the man he hated most in the world. And now, I had come to destroy it all, completely oblivious to the fact that I was aiming my cannon at a ship that my own ally had kept afloat. The papers lay scattered at my feet, a blizzard of legal jargon and financial figures that suddenly felt meaningless. Eviction notices, asset liquidation clauses, interest rate calculations. They were the weapons I had chosen, and I had just discovered they were all pointed the wrong way. The silence in the bakery was no longer just quiet. It was suffocating, filled with the weight of 6 years of secrets and a decade of my own blinding ignorance. Marco. Of all people, Marco. The man who had been my surrogate father, my champion, had been secretly propping up my actual father, the man who saw me as a disgrace. I felt like the world had tilted on its axis, sending me tumbling. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse. I looked at my father, who was still avoiding my gaze, staring at the floor as if the answers were written on the dusty tiles. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you just let it fail?" He finally looked up, and for the first time, I saw past the anger and the pride. I saw a man drowning in shame, a man so cornered by his own convictions that he had accepted help from his sworn enemy rather than admit defeat. "Because it's not mine to let fail," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. "It belonged to my father, and his father. It was supposed to be yours." His eyes met mine, and in their icy depths I saw a flicker of the profound, crushing pain of a father who believes he has failed in his most sacred duty. He hadn't just lost a daughter that night. He had lost the entire future he had envisioned, the only one he understood. "I hated him for it," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I hated taking his money. Every check he sent felt like a brand on my soul. But I hated the thought of telling your grandfather's story to a banker with a foreclosure notice more." My mother stepped forward, her hand finally resting on my father's arm, and this time he didn't shake it off. He leaned into her touch, a silent admission of his own fragility. "He did it for you, Clara," my mother repeated softly. "All of it. The anger, the stubbornness. It was all just love. Twisted up and soured by pride, but it was love. He was trying to protect you from what he thought was a mistake. He was just wrong." Wrong. It was a word I never thought I'd hear in the same sentence as my father's name, especially not from my mother. It was a simple word, but it changed everything. It reframed 12 years of hurt. He wasn't a monster who had cast me out in malice. He was a father, terrified and grieving, who had made a terrible, colossal mistake. And I, in my own youthful pride and righteous anger, had never once looked back. I had built my empire on the foundation of my own victimhood, never considering the ruins I had left behind. I knelt down, my knees hitting the cold floor, and began gathering the scattered papers, the offer to purchase, the default notices, the cold, hard proof of my intended vengeance. They felt alien in my hands now, artifacts from a different person. As I stacked them neatly, a decision began to form in my mind, clear and sharp as a shard of spun sugar. I stood up and walked back to the counter, placing the tidy stack where the folder had been. "I'm withdrawing the offer," I said quietly. My parents stared at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. "The Sterling Group is no longer your lender. As of this moment, I am personally buying out the bank's note. The debt is mine now." My father opened his mouth to protest, the prideful reflex still ingrained, but I held up a hand to stop him. "And you will pay me back," I continued, my voice firm but without the hard edge it had before. "Every single penny, but you'll do it on my terms. No interest, no deadlines. You'll pay me back when the bakery is thriving again." A flicker of hope, the first I'd seen, ignited in my mother's eyes. "Thriving?" my father mumbled, shaking his head. "Clara, you've seen this place. It's over." "No, it's not," I said, a new energy coursing through me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. "It's not over. It's just stuck. You're an artist, Dad. You're right. You're the best baker I've ever known. But you need a business partner. Someone who understands modern tastes, who knows how to market a legacy without destroying it." I took a deep breath. "You need me." He stared at me, his icy blue eyes wide with disbelief. You want to work here?" "I want to be your partner," I clarified. "Hanson and daughter. We'll keep the classics, the croissants, the wedding cakes, the things that made this place a landmark. But we'll innovate too. We'll introduce new flavors. A salted caramel cronut that will have people lining up around the block. A deconstructed Black Forest cake that will get us written up in food blogs. We'll combine my world with yours." I looked around the tired, dusty shop, but I no longer saw a mausoleum. I saw potential. I saw a foundation. We'll build a new legacy, I finished softly, together. For a long moment, no one spoke. My father looked from me to my mother and then back to me, his iron resolve, the pride that had been his shield in his prison for so long, finally crumbled. His shoulders slumped, and a single tear traced a path through the flour on his cheek. He nodded, a slow, jerky motion, unable to trust his voice. My mother let out a sob, this one of relief, and she threw her arms around him. Then she reached out a hand for me. I hesitated for only a second before taking it, stepping around the counter that had separated us for so long. For the first time in 12 years, we were a family again, huddled together in the quiet heart of a failing bakery, the sweet scent of yeast and forgiveness beginning to rise in the air around us. The road ahead would be long, filled with difficult conversations and the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust. But as I stood there, holding my parents' hands, I knew I hadn't come home to buy a business. I had come home to buy back my family, and the price, it turned out, was simply letting go of the past and baking a new future.